Very good morning to all of you. It's good to have you with us. The last day of this week, after which you have the long weekend. And yes, to my Muslim viewers, Eid Mubarak as well. And today, we are going to talk about news behind the news as usual. I'm Aran Bhaskar from BKBB, which is an acronym for Bhaskar Ki Business Baatein, which normally brings you every week policy analysis, conversations, and even an occasional business story. But right now, early in the morning, 8:15 in the morning, Mondays to Fridays, we bring you news behind the news. And today, my co-anchor is Saloni. Welcome, Saloni. And between Saloni and me, we are going to discuss three titles that we think are very important. The first is how the government thinks that lowered GST rates will mean agricultural costs will also come down. Really? Okay. And then we go to the second story, which is Saloni's story, where she talks about how GST could upset fiscal maths. And the third story is a combination of all the three and a little more, where we talk about how India might desperately need China's investments this year. Okay. Let's take the first story first. The government believes that the GST rates, which have come down, will also reduce agricultural costs because fertilizer costs and other costs have also come down. Well, that may be so. But there are two things that people must remember. While GST brings down costs, farmers are likely to lose more because the government has also allowed cotton duty-free. It's allowed onions at subsidized prices because it wants to keep the consumers happy. Now, the government has to choose between making consumers happy or keeping farmers happy because farmers have to grow more next year. When you bring in imports, the farmers will grow less. Effectively, for making consumers happy, or at least ostensibly happy, you are sacrificing farm interests. You're increasing rural poverty. And what this will mean is next year, the prices of agriculture products will go up, or else India will have to import even more from overseas, destroying the agricultural economy. This is not an easy time for the government. Elections are around the corner. Bihar elections are just around the corner, and national elections a year later. And obviously, it wants to look for shortcut, quick fix solutions. And GST could be one of them. And more on GST when Saloni talks about GST again. Saloni, come in with your story.
Yes, sir. So as we all know that government has reduced goods and service tax on several products, several sectors. So the much awaited GST reform is expected to catalyze domestic consumption. Still, it will cause a temporary revenue loss even as the government's tax mobilization has been weak this fiscal. Talking about fiscal, lower revenue mobilization will test India's fiscal consolidation record in financial year 2026. So, the most asked question about this is how significant is the GST reform? Well, most importantly, the rates have been rationalized in a manner that items of mass consumption are taxed lower, benefiting the common man and laying the ground for a boost in domestic consumption. Apart from the lower tax incidence, the registration process has been simplified, classification issues have been sorted out, and the inverted duty structure has been removed. Apart from this, there have been talks about revenue loss. The government has said that the revenue shortfall on account of lower rates would be to the tune of rupees 48,000 crore for a full year. It has arrived at this number based on the 2023-2024 consumption pattern. The government officials, on the other hand, are confident that this shortfall will be at best temporary. Lower GST rates will increase consumption, and a simpler GST 2.0 will ensure higher compliance, mitigating the revenue loss over the short to medium term. But economists, on the other hand, they warn about the bigger worry, that is overall decline in revenue mobilization this fiscal year. What do you think, sir?
Saloni, GST rates have come down. It looks good, will make consumers feel very happy. But when governments give with one hand, they normally take out with the other hand. And this time there's a very clever trick the government has played. And that is to minimize the shortfall of revenue, it has increased taxes on coal, on electricity, and on pipelines. Now, when you increase tax on coal and electricity and pipelines, expect the cost to eventually go up to the consumers because they can't bear the costs. The cost will be passed on to consumers. So temporarily, the consumers will feel good, but then inflation comes in, and then the costs go up, and it looks as the government has done a wonderful thing, but eventually the taxpayer pays. And this is the game that's going to play. There's a second problem. The government expects consumption to increase. But how will it increase if there's no purchasing power? Rich people who don't bother about taxes much because they can afford it, they will remain at the same level of consumption. Upper middle class will remain at the same level of consumption. The people who will increase consumption or can increase consumption is the lower middle class and the poor. But they need jobs. They need incomes. Salaries have not gone up. Instead of creating new jobs, more jobs have been cut, partly because of AI, partly because of poor demand. As a result, I'm not very sure that consumption is going to go up. It looks like consumption will go up, but may not. It's tricky. And that is why the third story that we're going to talk about is interesting. That could be one solution that the government's looking for. And that takes me to the third story, which is linked to the first two. And thanks to Saloni, where we got an insight into GST, we are now looking at what the government plans to do. The government wants to wants to change and liberalize laws to accelerate Chinese investments in the Indian markets. Why? Three reasons why. First, the West has not made any investments. In fact, the West has put in barriers, whether it's tariff barriers or quantitative barriers, making export for India a little difficult. So India has to depend on the domestic market. But the domestic market must have consumption power, must have purchasing power. For that, you need jobs. For jobs, you need investments. If the West is not going to invest, who will invest? The big daddy of investments is China. And that is why India is going to ask more investments from China. And the thawing of relations gives it one opportunity of creating new factories, new jobs, and increasing purchasing power. What's this front? Rules will be liberalized. Which rules, I'm not sure. One rule I definitely think will happen is liberalizing investments by Chinese into startups. There'll be other sectors as well. And let us see how things go. But I see new factories coming up through Chinese investments. It's good and bad news. The government's going to face a very tight position. It has to make the consumers happy. It has to make the country happy if it wants to win elections. And these elections are going to be very, very dicey, as the electoral battles both in Karnataka and in Bihar indicate. And that brings me to the end of news. But before I go into the third part, which is important, I would like sorry about that. Something got in my throat. But I'd like to go to the usual reminders. Please click the subscribe button. Please click the like button. But most of all, please tell all your friends about us. We need to grow faster. And that takes me to comments. The first comment that I get is that, so should we be happy about GST or not? Well, you should be happy about GST. Any tax reduction, even visibly, is a good thing because it creates a more logical structure, and you're already paying income tax over that, you don't want to pay GST. So, yes, you should feel happy, but if you think that's going to be a solution for your pains, it'll take some more time. And that is where you have to be a little careful about numbers as they roll out. And the statistics given out by the government are not always reliable. And that is why the GST is a good thing and a bad thing. So let's go to the second comment. The second comment. The second comment is, will the farmers get upset? Not immediately. The farmers will see the reduction in prices, they'll be happy. When imports begin and they find that they can't sell the produce, the price, and the price of agricultural commodity starts going down, that is when you should watch the farming. You're the rural lobby. Will they agitate? Will they accept it quietly? Electricity costs won't bother the farmers much because they get electricity at subsidized prices in any case. But electricity prices will go up. And chances are that industry will pay a higher price as electricity tariffs. So consumers are protected, farmers are protected, industry pays a price, which means the cost of production goes up, which means inflation, which means GST could be nullified. And that takes me to the third comment that's come in. And the third comment is, will investments in China be good or bad? Any investment is good news. As a famous saying as Deng Xiaoping used to say, and it's become a very famous saying, it does not matter whether the cat is black or white, so long as it catches mice. What we need to create is jobs. What we need to do is create wealth. Where it comes from is not so serious. You can handle that part separately. You can't handle joblessness. You can't handle poverty. You have to remove poverty, whatever the means. And that is why Chinese investments should be welcome. In fact, more welcome than ever in the past. And that brings me to the end of today's session. Thank you for being with us. And I look forward to seeing you once again on Monday. In the meantime, for the long weekend and for today, all the best. Do well. Enjoy yourselves. Take care.